All right, folks, let's finish up chapter 14, moving on now into the planning of the remote. Keeping in mind that many of these remotes are sales deals with particular advertising clients, so you want to make sure that whether it is a sales agreement or if it's just a promotional featuring some other company or brand or maybe a sports team or something like that, you want to make sure that the contracts are signed. Secure the contractual agreement. This is the time to make sure you understand the conditions that will exist at the site, such as what will and will not be provided for the broadcast. Do you need to bring extension cords for the power? Do you need to have any sort of special equipment because of the room or the situation you're going to be in? How long is the remote going to be? Are you going to have snacks provided and refreshments? Those things all going to be important details to know. Preparing the remote site. Familiarize yourself with the area and make a rough plan showing the locations for various pieces of equipment. Kind of have a layout in terms of where things are going to be available for you, such as connections to phone line and Ethernet, connections to power. Determine the availability of that power and assess external noise and wind conditions. Would you need extra wind filters and protectors? Is it better for you to use a different type of mic for a certain type of environment? Verify that the phone line is in place, or if you're using an internet connection, however you're going to get audio from the remote site to the studio, make sure you understand where that is and the logistics of making all of that work. Surviving a remote. Some good stuff here from a special section of the textbook. First off, work out in advance with management and engineering what is expected of you and of the remote. What sort of things are you handling on site? What sort of things are being handled back at the studio? Sometimes the remote might be responsible for playing audio, for recording audio. Sometimes it may be done at the studio, but coordinating the times to which interviews are going to be set down so they can record and all that. Make sure all of that is clear and understood by all parties. Consider public appearances that do not involve complex logistics. You want to try to keep things as simple as you possibly can. Easy tear up, easy tear down. Try to make things as simple as possible. If there's some sort of giveaway involved in the promotion, be absolutely certain you know the procedures and the rules. The FCC does not take kindly to stations that don't follow regulations on how to run contests. Make sure everything's on the up and up. Do not assume that security will take care of itself. Ask in advance who's in charge of keeping you, your equipment, and your airwaves secure. Do you need to bring extra personnel with you to help you make sure that things are being kept watch on, that there's protective measures in place for personal safety? Make sure all of that is clearly understood. Be careful of audience interaction. Do your best to prevent obscene content slipping over the air from a passerby. This is where, you may want to use good judgment before you ask someone if they're willing to come live on the air with you. You might not have the luxury of the dump button, so be wary of that. Be judicious in how you handle the sponsor of a remote that tries to go on air and stay on too long. Yes, they're paying for the time, so they kind of, in a sense, get to do what they want, but you also want to try at the same time to make it good radio. So part of planning in advance may also be that the remote agreement stipulates that you'll be on air, whether live or pre-recorded, that it may be for a certain length of time each hit that happens at the remote site. So being strategic with that time and making the most of it, both for the benefit of the quality of the broadcast and for the quality of the client that's paying for the remote as well. Preparing equipment. You want to make sure you take an inventory of the equipment you have before you leave for the site and also immediately after you arrive. In the textbook, there's a potential list of things that you may take with you. Might be a good thing to check out. Preparing a communication system. Again, work out with the studio producer who will be doing what. Be sure to have a clear system of communication before, during, and after the remote. If for no other reason, it's good for you both at the remote site and at the studio to be clear on what times the hits are going to be, how long you have before the hit comes up, how long you have during the hit, being able to talk back and forth if there's any audio issues. So make sure that all of that in terms of the protocol of how you're going to communicate each other is clearly understood. Let's go to sports now. The producer of a sports event who in smaller markets may double as the announcer will be responsible for assembling, for the announcer's use, rosters of players, color information. That's some of the commentary that sometimes they will do during a play-by-play. Also statistics. That person will also be responsible for the physical setup. So in addition to the equipment, in addition to the logistics of the broadcast, there's going to need to be some knowledge about the players and the teams and those that are involved on the field. Check all connections and microphones. Be especially careful of the location of the crowd mic and be prepared to move it or have another one already strung up, because you get someone that gets a little too raucous or a little obscene, that can really mess things up for you. So be strategic about that sort of thing. Again, it's a good idea to have that mic on a separate fader so that you can control whether something goes over the air or not. Talk to the announcers about who will handle the starts and the stops of the broadcast so that you're not having people talk over each other. You also don't have awkward dead air moments. Generally, when a play-by-play person and a color analyst get teamed up together, usually there's a bit of synergy between the two of them, and hopefully you have that luxury. But if it's a new team that's together and they haven't quite built up that chemistry, a little pre-planning will go a long way. Make sure you know where you are going to park on the day of the event. And I would say as well, you also want to plan in advance, if you need to lug equipment into the stadium, that perhaps you can get there in a time or make arrangements in such a way that you're able to make it so that you don't have to lug equipment across a huge parking lot in order for you to get your stuff into the stadium and get set up. Be aware that outdoor sporting events are subject to rain out and rain delay, so you're going to want to work out in advance what will be done for content if there is no game. Sometimes the station may decide to revert to regular programming. Sometimes there may be a need to fill with content from the remote site. So if that's the case, there needs to be some planning in advance there, whether it's in-depth analysis of the teams or maybe some sports news, something of relevance happening at the stadium, whatever it's going to be. But make sure there is a plan in place. Now let's talk about some particular sports and some tips and tricks that you may want to keep in mind. For baseball, it's a wonderful game for radio. It essentially features one player at a time. It benefits from a facile announcer who can tell interesting stories that captivate the fans. The motion of the play allows for someone that can really, really tell a good story and fill the gaps in between pitches and players. This is absolutely vital here. So you want to have someone that is eloquent on the microphone in that way. You also want a production staff that furnishes that person with support and information. Selecting those types of people going to be absolutely essential to a good baseball broadcast. Sounds of the game: a shotgun mic or a parabolic mic can be used to pick up the crack of the bat or the slapping of a ball into the catcher's mitt. This focuses where the source of the sounds are coming from, and these types of microphones are really good at capturing those kinds of sounds. Now, hockey, the action is so fast that it's difficult for an inexperienced announcer to keep on top of it, so you want someone that knows the sport and knows what they're talking about. An action microphone adds interest because the sounds of the hockey game aren't very loud. Might pick up some reverb in the arena that you're in, but that can sound really noisy and irritating to a listener, so you want to try to focus the source of sounds as much as you possibly can. Football listeners are among the most technically oriented fans in sports. In-depth analysis is usually called for, and you'll need someone who can handle this task. There's a lot of drama around the game of football, and someone that can really play into that when they're on air is the difference between a football game and a really good broadcast. Basketball. The mic must be selected with an ear towards eliminating noise from people next to the announcer and presenting decent acoustics at the floor level. Again, this is a situation where you can get a lot of audio bouncing around in the arena, so you want to try to mitigate the issues of reverb as much as you can. One option is to use a directional microphone or a headset mic for the announcer and then have a separate crowd microphone. Basketball involves a great deal of statistical information, so the announcers have to have the ability to keep numbers straight during the broadcast. If you're covering field sports, a parabolic mic or a shotgun is good for picking up ambient noises from the crowd and from the athletes. And a final note here as we wrap up the chapter, the most important factor in doing a remote broadcast, especially a sporting event, is getting there on time. And I would say to even get there comfortably early. So you want to plan plenty of time for traffic issues, for other delays, perhaps equipment failure, and trying to come up with ways to mitigate those sorts of problems. Now, that's not just in terms of getting to the remote site in a timely fashion, but that's just one piece of doing advanced preparation. It can make the difference between an inconvenience and a horror story. Having backup equipment can make the difference between executing a quick repair and not going on the air at all. Even just something as simple as a backup cell phone, that if you can't do the full-blown broadcast, you can have someone call into the station and talk on the phone. It's not ideal, but it's something. So you want to have redundancy, you want to have backups, you want to make sure you have as much on your side to help you to be able to have a successful remote broadcast. And that's going to do it for the chapter. We'll talk about your thoughts and your ideas when we get together in class. And, maybe we'll talk about some of your favorite sports announcers, some stations and games that you found rather memorable, what made them memorable. Or maybe if you went to the mall one day and there was a radio station set up and you spun the prize wheel. We can talk about all these things and more when we get together.